Podcasters Roundtable, round 61, audience engagement. That's right, you heard it here first. Today, you're going to see Todd Cochrane and Daniel J. Lewis get engaged on the... Oh, no, it's not that kind of audience engagement. Sorry. You guys didn't know what you were in for, did you? No, we're going to talk about, I guess, engagement and feedback. Are those different things with your audience? And I don't know if I'd say... we try not to make these how-to, but we're really curious about how each of the people on the roundtable engage their audience or, their experience with their show. And we can learn from that. So that is the goal today. Let's get right to it. Let's meet the roundtablers, starting with the co-host on the far end, Daniel J. Lewis. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to talk about podcasting, as always. And engagement is, I think, one of those things that's hard to measure, but it's the most important metric or measurement of anything with your podcast.
I like it. That's already starting off with something good, right? It's hard to measure. So that's very curious how each of us measures engagement, or even what engagement really means to you. Dave Jackson, welcome back, buddy. Co-host extraordinaire.
Yeah, I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and this should be fun. I'm looking forward to this because this could go like 8 million different ways.
That's right. Well, that's what we hope for on the roundtable. It can go any direction, and 2 new roundtablers, and then an oldie but a goodie on the end. And Scott, welcome to your first roundtable.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be here. I'm Scott Roberts of the Firecast Hot Sauce and Barbecue podcast, and a previous co-host of several entertainment podcasts.
A show about hot sauce, Todd. Like, we're talking niche, right? That sounds pretty niche. Look at, he's got hot sauce. This is a setup.
Join a club here.
Todd's probably your biggest patron. That's probably what it is. I know what's going on. No wonder he has to be on this round. All right, next to Scott, we've got, well, if you're watching on video, we have a radio tower, but it's Dan. He's coming in audio only. Thanks, Dan, for joining us on your first roundtable.
Thanks very much for having me, Ray. I'm Dan Quick from the Polycast Civilization series of gaming podcasts, and also a dramedy podcast called One More Turn.
Very cool. Multi-shows there. We did a show about adding another podcast to your repertoire because that's what happens. You start one, you tend to think of several other podcasts. But our returning roundtabler, Mr. Todd Cochrane, welcome back. How many shows do you have, Todd?
2. I have 2 shows, and I'm basically on your guys' time zone right now, so I'm lucky enough to be out in Washington, D.C., so I was able to jump on. I'm usually like in midst of stuff, middle of the day when you guys are on.
Yeah, he's got the hard life there in Hawaii, so that's what he's complaining about, his time zone in Hawaii. We'll take it. We're all going to move out to Hawaii, and we'll just do the roundtable at your time then. All right, audience engagement. Let's start it right off. Actually, you know what, Daniel, you brought it up. I'm not sure I even had it on my list. How do you measure engagement?
I'm not so sure that you can, other than just what is the general vibe you're getting from your audience.
How do you know? What does engagement mean to you? We're just tossing that out there as a generic term, audience engagement, but what does that even mean to you?
I think it's not only how much are they coming back for the content, episode after episode, staying engaged with it.
So would you say a subscriber is engagement to you?
It's one very surface level of engagement. But I think a deeper engagement is the interaction, when they start actually responding to content, commenting on the post, retweeting things, tweeting things, doing things I ask them to do in the podcast, clicking my links, emailing me feedback, anything like that. I think those are the bigger forms of engagement that are a lot easier to see.
So a lot of passive engagement, those are all things that you can do without, when I think engagement or when I say it, I think, am I having a two-way conversation? There's a lot of forms of engagement, just what you listed there, that don't include actual back and forth, right? You kind of asked for something and the audience took action.
Right, and if they don't take action, then you don't have an engaged audience. Even if you're simply asking them a question or something very simple like, hey, tweet this link or visit this site or anything like that, if they don't do it, then they're not engaged.
And this one actually leads me right into Todd. It reminds me of something. As someone who deals with advertisers and advertising and podcasters who get advertising. Engagement probably, I mean, that plays a role where you ask someone to do something on your show and they do it, right? So what does engagement mean to you, Todd?
Well, I think it's a pretty big story because, I build engagement from day one on the show. And anyone that's heard my story knows that my audiences I consider part of my ohana, part of my family. So from the very beginning, we have this very tight relationship, how we talk about things and what we do, and the feedback I get on the show, positive and negative, and of course, asking them to support the sponsor is critical. I've talked a great deal about how we've been able to have the same sponsor since July of 2005. I have basically new customer quotas to meet every month. That sounds kind of draconian, but it's true. If I don't hit certain numbers each month, then GoDaddy does, they don't give me a hard time, but, how much I make is largely based upon how many new customers we deliver. So the engagement has to be ask them to do something to support the show, but at the same time, the engagement is much deeper than that. It's the email, and it's the shout outs, and it's the stuff on Facebook, and it's an overall package for me.
Keep that in mind, because I want to revisit from the side of the podcaster who takes advertising and what engagement might have to mean for them. But I want to loop back around to that.
Sure.
Scott.
Yeah, I think there are several different types of engagement, and I think it's really what you're looking for. I would say the most intimate type of engagement is just simply an email or correspondence of some type. When you could say that there's kind of more of a surface level engagement when they retweet something you put out, or they like a Facebook post, or maybe even comment underneath it. But when they take the time to go to your website and clicking the contact link and filling a web form out and just telling you whatever is on their mind, it could be a criticism, it could be some input on something that you've talked about. I consider that to be the biggest and best form of input. And as long as I get some of that from every episode, I'm happy.
That can be a tall order. I mean, getting from every episode, like engagement, especially in the beginning, people come to you all the time, or come to us all the time and say, man, I'm putting out my number, my email, nobody's leaving comments, no one's calling my number. Like, it can be a hard thing to do at first, right?
Exactly, yeah. So you have to give, several pushes to your audience all throughout the course of a podcast episode. You could just be talking about a topic and then just kind of stop, at a good stopping point, a good breaking point, and ask, well, what do you people think of this that I'm talking about? And then give a pitch to your website and your contact form. Other things that I've done in the past is on social media, and it's more of a surface level engagement. I would tell people, hey, if you advertise, or retweet or do whatever to my podcast, I will mention your name, your Twitter handle, your website, whatever it may be, on the next episode of the podcast. And that gets a lot of good engagement, a lot of good participation, to where, episode after episode, when I did this a couple years ago, it turned into a 5-6 minute long segment just reading off all the names. But that was a good way to get them going, to get them listening as well, because I waited until the end of the podcast episode to list all the names and almost guaranteed them to listen all throughout the episode, instead of just tuning in the first couple minutes, listening to the names, and then kind of jumping off again. But I think the thing is to push and prod people and encourage them all the time. You just can't push out an episode and never mention contacting you. You have to let them know all the time.
And, that brings up another one. Dave, store that one in your mind about asking all the time and throughout your episode, and where you do that. And, write that down, Dave. We're going to revisit that one. But I want to ask Dan. Dan, how do you, I guess, try to engage your audience, or what does engagement mean for you as far as your show is concerned?
As far as my shows are concerned, reflecting a lot of things that have been said already, if you get people to listen, the first time they're trying it, okay, they like it, they turn around and subscribe. It's reactionary, but it's the beginning. Because if you can get someone to listen, then you can get someone to contribute. So that could be, for example, retweeting something sending an email. If you're doing a live podcast like I do, it could mean that somebody is writing in a chat room for everyone to see, including myself and my fellow co-hosts. It could be to the point of becoming a participant, bringing a guest onto the show, like the invitation here to join Podcasters Roundtable. And I know that if I appear, as an aside here, if I appear about 9 more times, I'm going to get a free T-shirt. So I'm keeping track of that. See, and these kind of things where you can also bring in the audience to, depending upon the show. I don't know how it would necessarily apply to you, Scott, with your hot sauce, but maybe you get someone who produces their own niche hot sauce, or someone that is a major manufacturer. You get them to come onto the show. You ask the audience, what questions would you like us to ask? And then you mention, this person asked this question. Sometimes that simple mention of a name drop can get people to be like, wow, they know who I am. I have a connection. It's not just one-way communication. That's a good way to start. But to essentially, if you want to get somebody to listen and keep listening, I think you want your audience to feel like you're talking to them and not at them.
Exactly. And to kind of branch off from that, I will actually have listener feedback episodes dedicated mainly to people writing in. And I will read off emails and answer questions. And that is another great way of addressing things personally. And, yeah, they will hear their names, and it's like, yeah, he knows me. And they will write back after that. It's like, Scott, you're so awesome. You're cool. You read my email. Thanks so much. And I get regular correspondence from them. It turns them, I guess, from regular fans into super fans, so to speak.
Yeah, Jim Collison in the chat says he finds engagement comes in bursts. He says a bunch, then nothing for months, followed by a bunch. Does anyone else have, Dave, what kind of engagement do you see with your show? You get an email every day? Tweet?
I get a lot of email. Now, what I do is I don't give a whole lot. Like, I don't say contact me on Twitter and Facebook. I just say go to schoolofpodcasting.com/contact. So
Why do you do that?
Because
Why?
Because if I give them 37 options, they will use none of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I give them one to remember, and then when they go there, they have email, SpeakPipe, Twitter, Facebook. But the bad news is, like, I just had somebody today said, I private messaged you on Google+. And I was like, all right. I didn't say, bummer. But I was like, I just do not check that, So I was like, all right, I guess I better, if I'm going to put it there, you got to check it. So that's the one thing you got to be careful of.
Careful, Dave. We are live streaming on the platform that feeds you here. Don't bite the hand of the Google Plus, or your check will get caught in the mail.
Yeah, I post all sorts of stuff over there. I just don't. I need to check that little alert button because that's what that's for. So yeah, I get a lot of email. The thing I hate recently with Twitter is if then this whatever that is, IFTT. And I appreciate this. Plus, I'm not complaining, but a lot of people retweet when I put out a post, and it's hard to tell now what's real and what's not. In a way, does that make sense?
You can tell. They'll come out like immediately after you publish. Their RSS picks it up and like spits it back out.
Yeah. So when I publish a show on Monday and I see a bunch of retweets, I'm like, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'm so appreciative, but you kind of wonder. Okay,
so
do I need
talk about that a little bit. What do we think of robo engagement versus like what you would feel like real engagement? Is that real engagement? Like, what do you guys think about?
Here's something though I think you should think about with that. Yes, it's automatic, but what does it show in their level of trust for you that they like your content so much that they've set up their Twitter account to automatically post whatever you post on your RSS feed,
or they're just getting some great content for their own feed. there's two ways we can look at it, right? I guess I'm a half empty type guy. I don't know what to say.
But that's why I said. Go ahead, Todd.
One thing that I see from probably having the longest running show of this group, we're at 11 plus years at this point, is that, you believe me, keeping people engaged after 1,100 shows and having them come in and send emails every week. There are some weeks there's no emails, but then it's like I get close to an anniversary, I get close to a special event, all of a sudden they start piling in, and I've had to rejigger my format a few times to re-up the engagement rate. I just made a change on the show recently that is paying off dividends right now, but like Dave does, I don't give them a lot of. Well, I give them two main options.
You have to share with that. Is that something we can do? What did you do?
Well, what I did was normally I read I asked listeners to send in articles. So on my tech show, I was covering them at the end of the show, but I really wasn't covering them. I was just kind of talking about them. So I said, I'm really doing a disservice to the listeners. They've taken the time to email me this article. So I moved those articles to the very front of the show. So it's the first thing I talk about. I talk about them as in-depth as I do the rest of the stuff, and now the stuff is just piling in. And along with that commentary and everything else, it was really dumb to have done it at the end the entire time, and I think it was one of those in-the-shower moments that you're thinking, oh, man, what I've been doing here, I've been really doing a disservice to the audience. But like Dave, I give them two primary ways to contact: email and Twitter. They can use the other stuff, and a few do, but the email is the best. Oh, by the way, you have to have an email address on your website for them to contact you. So many podcasters don't even do that.
Yeah, dude, trust me. If I go to your page and there's no contact or no easy way to find contact, that drives me insane. So make sure I can contact you. Now, I will say the difficult thing there is it does seem to invite spam when your email is, you have contact forms and emails on your website. You might see, so you're going to need another countermeasure for the
That's
spam.
That's not hard to protect against.
It seems hard.
And as I say to people, the burden of protecting yourself from spam should be on you, not on your audience.
Right.
Don't inconvenience 1,000 people to protect your one self. Think Spock here. The needs of the many outweigh the needs.
Trust me, I have it all there, and that's why I know like the troubles. Like, I'm just saying, do one thing, which I think you must do, which is that contact info. But you're going to need to probably take some measures to protect yourself, because I see it as a big hole for spam. It happens. All right, well, I haven't even got to the list of stuff I have yet, and we just keep opening topics. So this is awesome, Scott. Anything from that sort of conversation spark any ideas? Or I'm curious, where do you get most of where are you seeing, you give a lot of call to action, you say, in your show, but where are you seeing the most interaction with your listeners? Twitter, email?
I would say it's probably evenly divided between Twitter and email. Facebook, yeah, I will get a lot of likes. I don't consider them to be great interaction because it's so easy just to kind of thumbs up and go on about your business. Retweet takes a little bit longer, and I always greatly appreciate that because it's a link back from some other source. But it's probably, I don't know, maybe 40% retweets, 40% emails that I find the greatest amount of interaction. Of course, I always value the emails because someone has taken so much time out of their day to tell me about something. So I consider that to be above and beyond my favorite and the thing that podcasters should shoot for.
Yeah, that used to be before we had SpeakPipe, or you could say just send me an audio file that you recorded, or below getting an actual recording. Email was always sort of the holy grail. If you got someone email, especially when you get that first email, it's amazing from that person you did not know before your podcast, and it really. It's now the listener is tangible. I have a name, and these days we do live streaming and Twitter, and we can actually put a face to it, but that's pretty incredible. But it's definitely a high threshold ask, right? It takes a lot for someone to send you email. But Dave, you integrate feedback, listener feedback on your show, right? So is that your biggest source of engagement, or is that the one you're most interested in because it adds to your podcast?
That's the one I like. Of course, anytime I can get content, but even if it's not an audio recording, you can always, read the email and say, this came from so-and-so, and that will, somewhere so-and-so is like, oh my gosh, he's talking about me. Mm-hmm. And as much as we always kind of go, well, it's just me, big deals, but I hear that story over and over and over, how when somebody grew up and they called in the radio show, and when they heard, that DJ talk about that, it's still the same today.
I still remember the first time that I put out an email to a podcaster, and it showed up on their show, and it was really kind of before I think maybe I even started podcasting, and it was amazing to me because obviously back in 2005, 2006, podcasting, like if you saw people, if this still happens today, like you can go to a conference, people are like, oh my God, it's Dave Jackson. You're like, what? It's Dave Jackson. But they listen to your show, and they've been listening to it for years, and they meet you, right, Todd? How is that? We're not celebrities in any way, but for a brief moment, there's that interaction with somebody, and you're like, wow, I'm just Todd, but they're amazed to meet you, and it's a crazy feeling.
It's weird when they grab you at the airport. I've had all kinds of places, restaurants, so you just don't, when you have those moments happen, you're right, Dave. It's kind of like, wow. I mean, Ray, that was cool. And then you're thinking to myself, that was weird because they know you so well. But what's really even more surprising is you almost get to know them. You know who they are almost because they're part of your audience. So it's not like they're foreign to you. You actually do know them.
Yeah. Go ahead, whoever was that. I heard a voice. No?
I guess me.
That was you, Dan. Go for it.
Yeah, that was me. I think it also depends on what your show is about. Like, for example, in 2006, when I started Polycast and it was on the Civilization series of strategy games, a lot of the conversation happened in community forums on major fan sites. It did help. I think that I was a known entity in the community because I'd been running a fan site since 1998. But at the same time, while I was still running the fan site and I started the podcast, it was essentially to engage in conversation rather than me monologuing news items, which I had been doing before that time. And people would listen to it, and initially about 2006 you get a lot of, what's a podcast? Is that like radio? And now you don't get quite as much of that anymore. But I get people to listen, and they say, we hear that you're passionate about this, and you take topics from the communities, you take what it is that they're already talking about, you lend your voice to it, you bring forth the arguments and say so-and-so posted this, so-and-so posted that, and then going back to what I was talking about in terms of getting someone from being a listener to a contributor to a participant, having someone come on your show and having those rotating guests. In about 9 years since I've been doing the show, we've had almost 200 people come on Polycast. And it's been very helpful because I know that there's an existing community. But other times, with my audio drama, that's something that's my own intellectual property. It did not exist before I created it. So sometimes it's building an audience for the show. You're not just building it for the show, but you're also building it for the content. And sometimes that can be difficult, and sometimes that can be frustrating. And for those times that has been talked about when you're not getting an email, you're not getting a tweet, you're not getting a forum post, sometimes no news is good news. And I know that sounds terrible, but in a way, no one's saying anything. You're probably doing something right. You could say, well, yeah, Dan, either you're doing something right or nobody's listening. Ha, okay. There's that too. But I think also if you are able to get people to talk about the show with you, then they start talking about they start talking about your show with other people in the community, and word of mouth is big. I don't know when the last time anyone in the panel has just gone onto Google, typed in the name of your show, and see what conversations are happening, and sometimes you realize, oh, they're talking about my show here. I didn't realize on Reddit, for example, there were conversations about my show. I thought, oh, my bad, glad I found that out. Now I want to engage with that community and reflect that, so then now my circle and my show circles are even greater, because if I'm not talking about what the community's talking about, if I'm just pushing all the time what I think is interesting, certainly I can be passionate about that, but if no one else is talking about it, or there's no reflection in terms of what's going on in the news, what's this new strategy, what's this exploit that everybody wants to have in the game before it gets patched, then people aren't going to listen, or if they are going to listen, they're not going to stick around.
Todd, you said yeah, so what resonated there for you?
Just basically you got to go where your community's at. And that's what he's doing. He's finding where his community's hanging out, and he's going to them. And sometimes you have to go new places and seek out new communities, and then get to be known and work your way, into the mix. And I think going back, what was being said, that sometimes it's dry. It's a dry season. Sometimes life events can cause a huge influx of emails. I had one huge life event that resulted in over 2,000 emails coming in. It's not the type of life event people want to have, but when the audience knows, when your audience knows that you need them, they will come through. They will surprise you at that moment that you're really kind of like, what am I really doing here? Then all of a sudden they just blow you away.
It's insane. That is, I had a guy offer to drive 4 hours. I'm moving this weekend, and a guy offered to drive 4 hours because he had a van. He goes, I can help you move. I'm like, are you in Ohio? He's like, no, I'm in wherever. He's like, it's only 4 hours. I'm like, only 4 hours? I'm like, give me a break. So,
to help someone move, no less.
Yeah, exactly.
Like your friends don't want to help you move.
Yeah.
That's when they know you.
Yeah, exactly. I know you. Yeah, I was, trust me, I was the guy with the truck for a while. Don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
Everybody's your friend. So what hasn't worked? Have you guys tried something and it's like, that just, I'm getting nothing off that call to engagement, right? Like a call-in number. I've had a call-in number forever. I would say that I don't get calls on it the way that I used to. It probably has, and I could guess why that is. Todd, you're saying, does that sound familiar or
Yeah.
what?
First 5 or 6 years, the call-in line was like, bam, I was getting 4 or 5 a show, and then it just like, boom.
What do you think's going on with that? At least for you.
No, what it is people. Where's my phone? It's on the charger. People now are doing this. They're texting. They're not calling anymore. They're texting and instant messaging and hanging out, and they're not using the phone.
So I need you to Snapchat in your question, is what you're saying.
Something, yeah. You got to make it cool. Whatever.
It's where the kids are.
Yeah.
Todd alluded to this earlier. I make a bad habit of asking for stuff at the end of the show. And
yeah, but we've heard, isn't that where the audience that is most likely to do it is at the end of the show? Is that not true?
It's true, but I also, I'm like, in some cases, a few have dropped off that might have responded, but they got bored in the interview. Hopefully not, but it happens. And so I am now, if I really want engagement, I actually put it in both places. Like one week I'll put it at the beginning, next week I'll put it at the end. I always treat podcasting like church. They say if you want your message to get out to everyone in your church, you have to say it 3 weeks in a row.
Right, and we see that with advertising, right, Todd? It's like 7 times.
Oh yeah. But on my show, I ask them 4 times. There's 4 segments of my show I ask them to email or make a comment.
Yeah,
but it's quick. It's bam. It's in and out. I don't waste any time. It's like, hey, what did you think of that? geeknews@gmail.com. Then it move on.
Yeah.
You just hit them.
What about, this is one I didn't think about, what about your own engagement? Clearly we all listen to podcasts. What about your own engagement with other podcasters? How do you engage? Can we think about how we do it? I mean, I love Twitter. It's not my biggest place where I have a following, but it's just, I love it. It's easy to interact. It's quick. I'm on my phone, wherever. It's very simple for me. And I will tweet a podcaster probably before I do anything else. Once, back in the day, I sent in my 5 and 5 to Dave. That was before I had an audio show. It was a video show only. So, I've gone that far. That was high-level engagement, I would say, Dave.
Yeah.
But, what do you guys, how do you engage other podcasts?
I like to go to the show notes page, and that's where I'll comment, because what I want, when I'm engaging, I want to have a conversation with others too, or let others see my thoughts. So I don't want it to be only on Twitter where it's basically only to that person I'm following and our mutual followers. But I'll comment on the show notes if I can. But if they don't have comments enabled on their show notes, then I don't engage.
Scott, you were going to jump in there?
Yeah, I tend to go to where a lot of the action already is. And with the podcast and the video podcasts and shows on YouTube I tend to gravitate towards Facebook. There's just a lot of good conversation there, and on YouTube as well. When it comes to show notes pages on people's websites and their blogs, I hardly ever go on there. And maybe it's because I find very little traffic and very few comments on my own show notes pages.
And that's exactly it, right? Like I was trying to flip this. Like, can we reverse engineer our own show? Like, how do we interact? And do you have that available to your listener, right? Danny, you have comments enabled, and what's the choice between having comments and not having comments? Why wouldn't you have comments enabled?
Some people have, some very prominent podcasters have disabled comments because they said, well, the conversation's already happening in social media. And I think there's a thing there where it's a balance between where are you telling people to engage with you? Are you actually telling them where to go to engage with you? And letting them engage in the way they want. I mean, I could say that, I get a lot of interaction on Twitter throughout the day, so I'm going to turn off all of my comments because everyone's engaging with me on Twitter. No,
I mean, like a podcast, like you should be in every directory, why would you cut off anyone who wants to communicate with you? That just makes no sense.
Yeah, it's not like you're asking someone to, go down a dark alley to listen to your comments. If someone, well, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I turn off my comments because nobody's commenting.
Right.
And then you can say, well, yes, nobody's commenting. Yeah, because now you've turned off the comments. But also maybe because nobody was commenting in your comment system because you yourself weren't engaging. Maybe there was one or two people that tried, they didn't get something, or they did get something, but it was weeks later, and it was, oh, what was that about? I don't care anymore. But I think if you're going to go ahead and you're going to post show notes, like in my case, I post show notes on my website. I post show notes when I go to community forums. That's part of the opening post. I tell people, this is the segment name, this is the timestamp, this is what we talk about. I link to the topics. Where is this source material coming from? It's typically not coming from us. If it's coming from, for example, a member of the audience, if it's an email, I'll mention that there's an email. I won't post the entire email in the show note, but a lot of the conversation that I have with people, it's public. So sometimes even before I can respond, another listener responds, or at least someone else who came across the thread responds. So I think if you're telling people that I just want to go to social media, you're kind of slapping the hand that feeds you in a way, because you're telling someone not to do something when they want to engage with you. And so if you tell them no, especially if it's right away, especially if their first attempt, that's just going to turn them off. As far as myself with engaging, though, I think, the expression that doctors make the worst patients, I think I'm one of those people listening to other podcasts, which is, wow, that was a great show. I'm not going to tell them it was a great show because obviously they know it was a great show because I listened to it. So only if I have a particular complaint, typically would I engage, although obviously a notable exception here is the Podcasters Roundtable, unless, of course, Ray's deleted all the hate mail that I've sent him over the years. Actually, I've never sent you hate mail, but I will. I will promise to send you hate mail, so that way you do not go a day without email, Ray.
I appreciate that.
I knew you would.
Yeah. Now, and, speaking of engagement, technically there is a chat, and it's important to bring that in. So let me look over here, and Maya, who was on last Roundtable, which was really cool. She's the cover girl on that one. Go to podcasterroundtable.com. Am I asking for engagement at that one? Sort of. She asked, do you measure engagement differently for a newer podcast or a niche podcast than a larger podcast? If that makes sense. Do you measure engagement differently for a newer podcast or a niche podcast as opposed to a larger podcast? I was curious about this larger podcast question because shows that are crazy successful, like Serial or WTF, what do you think their level of engagement is? Like, at some point, are people engaging to market, or are they, to say, hey, I need to engage so my audience grows, or do you think, I can't say do you think those podcasters engage with their audience, but at some point, you're doing it to engage, for the reason of engaging, to have a conversation. You're not trying to grow your show. And those shows, they could not engage any of their audience and still be hugely popular. Mm-hmm. So do we measure, I guess I should wrap back around to Maya's question, but do we measure engagement differently for a newer podcast, a niche podcast, a large podcast, I guess you could say?
I think I watch shows often, or listen to shows often, that have high engagement because it seems to be very interactive. And I think the folks that do it the best, and the podcasters, they're a little quirky in their content, but if you listen to the No Agenda show, they are masters. Adam Curry and Dvorak are absolute masters in engaging.
Fred Castaneda is in the chat. He pointed that out, so he's agreeing with you wholeheartedly right now.
They are massive. If you want some lessons in engagement, go listen to that show and do 2 or 3 episodes. That's like 10 hours of content. But new podcasters, the biggest thing I hear from them is my audience is not engaging. They're not talking to me. They're not emailing me. So if you figure a small new show, and let's say they have less than 500 listeners, you might only have a dozen or 20 listeners that are really maybe the ones that will be engaging initially. People are very hesitant, so you have to give them a reason to engage. So as a new show, I always tell people, have a little contest. Have a little giveaway. Say this, I'm going to give something away if you tell me about what you like or what you hate about the show, or give me feedback, and you get that going, and then give that prize away. Make sure you deliver it in a timely manner. That'll help small shows get engagement going. But big shows. Did Serial even engage with their audience? Did they? I don't know. So can someone tell me? Did Serial actually have people doing social media at all?
No idea.
Well, they did have some social media, like a Facebook page, and there was some interaction there. But the host themselves weren't engaging with the audience, like through the podcast itself. You never heard an audience member mentioned.
And I mean, it doesn't lend itself in that case, right? So what's the difference between a show that takes engagement? I assume, does everybody here integrate engagement back into their show?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. So I think that's probably more common for a podcast, but I mean, now we've hit this sort of storytelling podcast, which is becoming big, and it doesn't lend itself to outside the story. Not yet, at least not in the stories I've seen so far. What's your favorite way? I know, Dave, you do SpeakPipe. Nick Silberling in the chat room says he uses Call-In Studio. I believe that's what he said he uses.
Yeah.
I'll have a conversation or mention someone if it's a tweet that's relevant to a topic or an email or something. I got bad about playing listener feedback, so that was partly part of the problem. And I imagine one of the reasons I didn't get as much as I asked for is because, I haven't really heard listener feedback. So that's one I need to do better on myself. But what about for you guys? How do you integrate?
With my Once Upon a Time podcast, we do get a lot of feedback for that one because it's a TV show fan podcast. And we really have to be curators and quality curators here, because sometimes people will send in feedback that it's great to hear from them, but it's not really feedback we can do anything with. So in any case, if I can't directly quote from their feedback, and I don't always read everything they wrote, but if I can't quote directly from them, I might just reference them to say, yeah, some of our listeners like Alina and Paris and John mentioned this too, or they agree with this, or they really like that, or they didn't really like that. So I'm not actually reading what they spent their time sending, in the podcast at least, but I am acknowledging them, and they appreciate that.
Go ahead.
I'll tell you, the one thing that drives engagement on your audience the best is get a hater. When you have a hater on the show, their email goes to the top. I read their email first, and I'll be impartial in the reading and try to take on what they say, and then I'll tell the audience, "What do you think of this email?" And then that will. You've played the audience a little bit, but I love haters, and I had one guy that was from New York that was about every fifth show he'd email me something. He doesn't email anymore. He hated himself off the show, but you want a few haters.
So I had a question in here that says, do you prioritize feedback? Daniel talked about sort of filtering for quality. Is it relevant? Is it going to fit into the show? Todd, you just said the haters go to the top, man. And I was thinking like patrons, right? So if you say, hey, if you're a patron at the $5 level, we give you a shout out. You mentioned the No Agenda show. They have all this crazy like Knight and King and all this crazy stuff. If you donate, you sort of get bumped up. So you can almost pay to be, what do you guys think about that in terms of, a lot of us, we all started from passion. And so now you've got this sort of divide where you've got maybe some donation model and someone might be able to get their name mentioned. What about the person over someone who maybe has been listening for years? I don't know. Do you guys run into that? Do you deal with it? What do you think about that?
I've never done it myself. I think that's a whole other topic of, should you have donations available on your website? Should you have a Patreon account and have different levels? I consider, all my feedback to be important and equal, no matter if it's negative or positive or just kind of a fluff and just, hey, nice show, Scott, and that's about it. If like I mentioned earlier, I will have the all feedback episodes, and I try to read everything I can. I do kind of filter out some of the I don't want to say fluff emails or pieces of correspondence, but ones don't necessarily ask a specific question or address an issue, but I try to get a good cross-section of what I have received.
Right, and I mean, I'm sure you, whether it's read on the show or not, you go back to those people. Say, hey,
yes.
Man, thanks, or whatever. I mean, like, for me, it's always been really important to respond. I'm in front of my computer all day, so I usually respond within a couple hours, almost certainly to 24 hours. But I will say at some point my YouTube channel got popular enough where I couldn't get to the comments as fast. It's not, your response is not necessarily scalable, right? So how do you guys handle that? I mean, and it really, that's one of the things I pride myself on, is a quick response. So sometimes I'm just up really late answering comments on YouTube, but that's important to me. What do you guys think about that?
I think if you have questions that you're getting asked a lot, then that's something that you could compile into an episode itself and, for example, put on your website. And you could even make it clear, and there's, whether you think this is a good idea or not, but you could have, commonly asked questions, and so that way maybe you will go ahead and you will respond to, oh, that's a commonly asked question, I know that's on my website, I know that I've addressed that on episodes in the past, I will respond to it, but it doesn't have the priority as the next message that I'm looking at, which is asking me something more specific. I would not make a distinguishing between someone who, say, is a Patreon supporter or someone who is not. I'm looking at what it is that they're trying to find out, the quality and the content. Sometimes I will read that on the show. Sometimes I won't. Sometimes, as you were saying, Daniel, you will say, well, so-and-so agreed with us or they disagreed with us. You can go ahead and read that. We will link that into the show because sometimes you get this really long block of text and it really is not conducive to conversation. But I think it's one of those times where you want to tell the audience, I want to get back to you in a timely fashion. And sometimes if that means you have to put in filters and you kind of communicate that, it's if you ask me a question that's on this list, you may not get a response from me right away because I do want to get back to you, but there are other things that I want to be able to do. And I think it's also a measure of respect, not only respect in terms of eventually getting to the reply, but if you're getting 10, 12 people telling you the same thing, asking you the same question over and over, and you're just responding individually, it's, okay, definition of insanity, right, is that you're doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So to me, if you don't change that, if you don't put that in another way that's more accessible to everyone, say on your website or on the show, then you're going to get bogged down, your audience is going to get frustrated, you're going to get frustrated, and then audience engagement starts to go out the window.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just as a website developer and having built websites for big companies, getting hundreds of emails a day, I think it's a great idea on your contact page somehow to put up links or maybe a drop-down menu of things. Well, do you want to ask about this?
FAQ, I mean.
FAQ, yeah. It might take you to those questions, and it'll just have them answered. So I believe if you get just gargantuan numbers of emails about the same topics all the time, then yeah, filter those. I'm a huge fan of that. And that's something I'm actually considering putting up on my website right now because I get Kickstarter solicitations for me. Hey, Scott, can you advertise my Kickstarter campaign for my new hot sauce? Well, I've never tasted your hot sauce, so I'm not going to.
And that's much different. I wouldn't even put that engagement, right? That's just someone trying to. Yeah, they're trying to get their brand out through you, but
solicitor.
Yeah, well, exactly.
What I do in that case, because I hate the CR website answer, because it's like, even if it's there and I missed it. So what I do is, when I put my system in place, I wanted a system that I could search and find the answer quickly, so that instead of saying, here's the answer, even though I'm right there, I've got the link right there, I will copy that answer and put it in the email and paste it. So it looks like I answered it, and it's the same answer I give everybody. Wait 24 to 48 hours, I'm sure iTunes will refresh.
I'm always nervous that that person knows the other person, and then they're like, did you get the canned answer? Yeah, he sucks. So I personalize all my emails. It's ridiculous.
I always try to put something there, so I sandwich it with, thanks for emailing.
A name is so huge, and I know sometimes it can be automatic, but for me, when people say my name, I'm always surprised. Or they say, hi, Ray. That's how it almost always, usually it's not spam when they use my name or they personalize it some way, but I always try to use the person's name. For me, that's just big. I don't know.
Well, and we were talking about feedback. It's interesting because to me, we are the gatekeepers between us and our audience. And if we want engagement, we've got to deliver value. So I have a thing right now where I'm asking people to tell me, what is your absolute favorite podcast? I do it every year. And I've had a couple people, I'd update my website, that said my favorite podcast is mine. As in, Ray would go, I love the Podcasters Roundtable. Well, the whole point of this was to say, why do you feel connection with this? We're looking into the why. And so I just had to say thank you so much for sending that in and hitting SpeakPipe. I'll check out your show, but in the meantime, really, what's your favorite podcast that's not yours?
They should know that. They know. Come on.
Yeah, and I was just like, come on. Because to me, that was just like spam.
Yeah, that's a promo opportunity. Max Flight in the chat says, I'm a co-host on one show where the host created an industry-specific hashtag matching the show name. Now huge numbers of tweets contain that hashtag. There's an ongoing conversation going on about the topic on Twitter. So there's sort of a newer way to have a conversation. Hashtags, I think, are great. I participate in hashtag conversations oftentimes when I see it around a topic, and that often leads to engagement with people that didn't even know I existed. So that's actually, I'm a hashtag fan. I also like emojis, so there you go.
That's something that Pat Flynn does also with his Ask Pat podcast, is that he'll say, if you have a response for this person that he answered, or if you have a suggestion, whatever, tweet with the hashtag AskPat and then a number after that, for that episode number.
So Ray likes emojis. You're the one that's responsible for the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year, right, Ray?
Is that a word of the year? The only word of the year I know is when podcasting was made word of the year. Literally, that's like the only time I've ever heard. No, yeah, that's not me. I just recently got into emojis because they're making it so easy now, and I've always been a semicolon parentheses guy, because you can't convey, it's hard to convey emotion or humor. So I'm a big smiley face, because you try to be funny or sarcastic in an email and it goes south really fast.
Yeah.
Really fast, right? That's another thing too, with engagement, it can go south on you pretty quick, and oftentimes the squeaky wheel, right, is the one that, I talk about the silent majority all the time. That's usually who's listening to your show. And someone else on this roundtable mentioned about if you have a complaint, that's when you speak out. So we'll hear that from our show sometimes, or from our listeners sometimes. The engagement is not necessarily pretty.
Yeah, I think if you have someone who is, the hate just to hate, if there isn't anything constructive in that at all, then if it is something that you engage with, then you do it with caution. You decide, am I going to engage with this, number one? Does this mean that I'm just going to try to contact them privately? Am I going to put their comment on the show? Am I going to paraphrase what it is that they are saying? And I think in that respect, if someone is taking the time to say something that they don't like, as short of lots of explicatives and comments about your mother, they have thought a lot about this. And if they're that passionate about what they don't like, then you can respond to that. And what I would often do is I would try to find the glass half full to go with the glass half empty, which is, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I will say, either I agree, let's see if we can try to incorporate that some way, make some changes, or no, I respectfully disagree, and these are the reasons why. Now tell me, what did you like about the show? You turn it back on them and have a conversation.
Dan, were you ever in customer service? Are you killing them with kindness? Because trust me, I have many years of killing them with kindness.
If you want to separate the men from the boys, and go, hey, thank you so much for the feedback. I would love to talk to you more about this. What's your Skype, and let's set up a time.
Call me.
Because I have actually done that, and actually had somebody take me up on that who is now a member of the School of Podcasting.
Ta-da.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think I've ever gotten hate mail over the show. I've gotten hate mail over my opinion on a topic. So it's more like debate. So someone will disagree on a piece of content. I don't often get emails on the format.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much what I meant. You'll say something on your show that, it's really hard. You can't please everybody. And something you say at some point is really going to make someone angry enough they're going to write that email. But sometimes, that might be, like they said, sometimes not hearing is a good thing, because you are, for the most part, doing things people like, because they're not reaching out to say, hey, don't do that anymore. Dave, turn down the compressor.
Stuck on it. Well, I know it's funny because I don't get a lot of feedback. I do a show called Weekly Web Tools, and the only time I get feedback is when I say, I'm thinking about putting this one down, and they come out of the woodwork. And they're like, no, I'm listening, no. Oh my God.
I mean, look at Roman Mars, right? He was going to pull the plug on one of the shows, his Invisibility, or no, what is he, his Invisibilia? I don't know, whatever. Yeah. He was going to pull the plug, he did the Kickstarter, and then he at the time set a record for the people supporting the show. I mean, that's pretty, a Patreon or a Kickstarter, is someone supporting your show monetarily? Is that engagement?
Sure. I mean,
Do you remember your first piece of engagement? I should go right to Todd. He already declared himself the oldest podcaster. Okay, the longest running, but he's in the Hall of Fame, so he gets to declare that even if it wasn't true, it is true. Todd, do you remember then you don't remember your first piece of engagement? Feedback.
I have it all. So let me go.
I'm trying to pull mine up.
How would you? What are you
Wait,
going by
I'm doing that
date?
too.
Are you
doing
filtering
that
by date?
Well, it's okay. So it's really impossible to get to it right now. 55,345 emails have come in. Yeah. So let's see if I can get close to the.
As you're searching, I don't think I recall, but my show, the Podcaster Studio, actually started as a live show. Don't do that. Dave will tell you, don't start off as a live show. Where I was asking for the engagement. And guess what? When you start off, like Dave will tell you, you don't have an audience. So who are you asking to engage you, right? So it was really tough. I wanted to take questions. But I remember Eileen. Is her name Eileen? It's spelled a little weird. I think she was like the first person to like log onto the live. She was the one person that I had no idea who she was. She's on like episode, they're in the hundreds or thousands. They're still going. So I feel this connection. She probably thinks I'm pretty weird too, because every like year I check in. I'm like, hey, how's it going? And remember me? And so, yeah. So I think that was my first piece of engagement, but it was a live stream where she was asking the questions that I was asking people to ask. So anyone else?
I will say, though, that the engagement was heavier in the early days, and because everyone was so excited about the space, I would spend 20 minutes on email that had come into the show because there would be, 30 emails to read. There's nowhere near that many that come in anymore. So it's just because the space has changed, and I think people are busy.
With me, it was just the initial excitement of, we really needed this, for our community, for the whole industry. That's great. We're glad you came along, but it just, those types of just, I don't know, either emails or comments on Facebook or wherever they may be, tweets, have really died down. And now it's just more of the specific questions and feedback type things.
All right. So if engagement has died down, if that's true, what's the role of engagement? Is it important? Is it less important? What do you guys see the role of engagement? What's the future of having, I guess we're talking about so many different forms, right? There is the retweets, the likes, but what about a conversation with the listener? There's even engagement in person, right? Meetups, right? Do you guys do any of that? So what's the future of engagement? How do we get it back? Do we need it back? Is it important for a podcast to be engaged with your listenership?
Oh, always important. If anybody listens to Gary Vaynerchuk, he urges everyone to jump on.
Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah, you do it just the right way. No, he urges everyone just to jump on whatever the new social media thing is, whatever the new tool is. If you're scared of it, but your users are using it, then you're just going to lose out on that. So I'm a fan of that, even though I'm not like a big Instagrammer or whatever. But you need to go where your audience is. But there are just so many reasons to continue engagement. It's feedback. It just, if people tell you about this or that, what they want out of the show, if they miss certain things, and also just they help promote you. That is a huge thing that I continue to count on. New people jump online, new people jump on Twitter or Facebook, and they may not know about you. They may not know what a podcast is, but through people spreading the word about your show, oh, I didn't know there was a podcast about that. That is crucially important. So for many, many years to come, I see just feedback like that and promotion like that. It has to be an absolute must.
I would say it also. Oh, go ahead.
For me, it just puts gas in my tank, and not physically, but when I get feedback, I'm like, okay, wow, somebody's actually listening to this. So when I get feedback, and that's why when you said that earlier, Ray, I'm like, you know what, I need to start sending notes to people like, wow, Todd, that was a really good episode. Todd keeps me up to date on all sorts of crap. I love the New Media Show. And so, I need to let him know that because there are, we all know there are times when we're like, is this thing on? You put out the episode and you're like, this is the one that's going to get retweeted to death, and it just crickets.
Here's my theory on why we don't get that very often and why we don't do it. Because, yeah, the same thing you're saying, I'd love to do that more often. And I realized, why is it that I don't just say, great episode, or thanks for sharing this, or something? And that is because of this little device in my hands called a mobile smartphone. I listen to podcasts on this often while I'm away from my computer. I have my thoughts while I'm away from the computer. And the praises about it, unless it's something that really stands out to me of, oh, I want them to know this thing, or I want to say this specific thing, I'm usually away from my computer, and I don't think about it by the time I get back to my computer to be able to go and say something nice. And that, that could be a really cool feature for a podcast app in the future that someone should make, is the option to very easily respond to the content right on your podcast app, maybe even to use Siri to say, hey, comment on this.
Well, I know, like we have I think it's the Libsyn app at work, you can call right in on the app, I believe, which is nice. So yeah, more apps integrating easy ways for you to respond, and then you making the listener aware of that, I think is important. As we roll through, coming up on the hour here, I'm going to ask one question from Jason Norris in the chat. We'll go out on this question, so you can answer this or not. It's up to you if you want to engage the PR audience.
Wow, no pressure.
No pressure. Don't be a hater. And let us know. Answer the question. Let us know where we can find your content so we can engage with it. And man, that felt so cheesy game show. I'm working this thing. Here we go. And then we'll say goodbye. So Daniel J. Lewis, you are co-host. So you're first up. Let's see. And everyone else gets to think. Gets time to think about the question. Jason Norris asks, if you don't have an audience yet, what would be the best way to get that engagement started for you, Daniel?
To get an audience. Okay, so let me answer the question slightly differently, because if you don't have an audience, there's no one to engage. If you have,
how to get
audience,
started?
Yeah, when you're starting out, give them a reason to contact you, and make it as easy as possible. No matter how much hard work that takes for you, make it easy. Give them a reason. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com.
Awesome. See? Pro. Nice job. Dave, you're the other co-host here, buddy, so you got to live up to it.
The trick I've heard, it's an old radio trick. Come up with a question that you've either seen in a forum or something that you know your audience is asking. Give it to your brother and go, here's my phone number. Please call this in and ask it. Now, am I lying to my audience? No, somebody actually called in and asked it. When I can just say, all right, this one came from Doug. I don't have to say he's my brother, but once they hear, oh, wow, he's asking questions, sometimes that will prime the pump. And I learned that because when I called in to a radio station, they basically did the same thing to me. I wanted a song played. They said, no, we're not going to play that. Well, you can request Loverboy, and I'm like, okay. But it got me on the radio. And I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. You can contact me at schoolofpodcasting.com/contact.
Nice. Oh, hey, way to give the call out for engagement. I love it. That was, wow, way to step up. 2 pros. You guys don't, the rest you don't have to. Todd has, you all have shows. Yeah, you got to be pro. But I like that. Sometimes you do need to prime the pump or give the listener permission when there's always this assumption that someone else is going to do it, or I've heard someone else do it, right? So sometimes you just pass it off to the next listener. But I think going back, that's kind of a call out we do for International Podcast Day, is like, go give your favorite podcaster some feedback. So, all right, Scott, you're up.
I would say put all of your social media links everywhere. If you're on Facebook, have links going back to Twitter and your website. Just have it be an all-encompassing web with everything pointing to everything else. So if people happen to discover you on Twitter or on Instagram or on iTunes or wherever it may be, they could easily jump to a way to get back with you, to contact you. Don't have it be hidden anywhere. Make it be as easy as possible. So that's my tip. I'm Scott Roberts, and you can listen to my podcast at thefirecast.com. And I might as well give a contact link. It's thefirecast/contact.
Awesome. Very cool. Great job on your first roundtable. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Some good stuff in the chat here at the end. Mike Howard, he says that unless he's listening live, he listens on his phone. And Daniel chatted back that it was a great point. I believe that's the one you're responding to. Maybe that's why live shows see a ton of engagement. Listeners have been building it up and holding it in. But I was thinking too, live shows, this is my tips, maybe we're recording this, it's a podcast, it will be, but it's recorded live. Lots of engagement right now. We're seeing it. I know the people who watch the Roundtable, these are the highly engaged people because they're showing up for the live and they're asking and leaving all kinds of great comments. Blab is another great platform. You see lots of engagement there. So if you're new, you could go to a Blab, and because it's social and it gets shared, you're probably going to see some engagement. So give that one a shot. All right, Dan.
Okay, to echo to what some other people have already been saying, give the audience a hook. You're doing something with passion, you're doing something unique, you're doing something with an interesting take, you're reflecting on what you're hearing already. Find where the audience already is, if it exists, go there, and make yourself available. Social media, email, with the live streaming. I've been live streaming Polycast since 2011. We don't get a lot of people listening on a regular basis, but some of the people that engage the most then turn around and they essentially move from being a listener to a contributor on the live stream to being a guest on the show. Find a way for the audience to become part of what it is that you are making. Make the audience feel that even though you own the show, you market it, and you produce it, it's a community show. They have a stake in it as well, because if someone feels like they have an ownership stake in the content and the direction and the format, they're more likely to engage and to continue to engage. My name's Dan Quick, and you can find my Civilization series of gaming podcasts at thepolycast.net and my audio dramedy at onemoreturn.net.
Awesome. Very awesome. Thanks for your first Roundtable and returning Roundtabler. Todd, man, a lot of good stuff has been said. I don't know if there's anything left, but you're up.
I ask questions. I ask the audience questions, and I ask their opinions. When they send that data in, I respond to it, and I value the opinion. But I also tell them what to do. I tell them what they have to do. I give them tasks to do, and that really works well to build engagement. Because again, it goes back to what was been said already. They're part of the show. So I'm Todd Cochrane from GeekNewsCentral.com and the New Media Show at newmediashow.com with my co-host, Mr. Rob Greenlee. You can reach me at geeknews@gmail.com or on Twitter at geeknews.
Awesome. That was amazing. It was a really fun round. I felt like it just was nonstop. There was a bunch of questions I didn't even get to, so the best thing to do is just close. That was a good one. I love the closing advice there. So much good stuff. So hopefully everyone in the chat, Scott Black is there, Mark Johansson. Did I say that right? I think I got that right, Mark. Dave Jackson mixing it up in the chat while he's live streaming. Thank you, sir. Jim Collison, Gary Fawcett, Jason Bryant, Nick Suberling, Fred Castaneda, of course. He's always here. He's one of our biggest engagers. Stargate Pioneer, Max Flight. So thanks for all the tons of engagement. Go over to podcastersroundtable.com. Sign up. Get on the list so we know you're out there, and we can pull you in so you can share all your great tips with the entire podcasting community, because we know every podcaster will be on this show at one time in the near future, right? We'll get them all. All right, you guys, that's it. Wave goodbye. We're out of here. Thanks, everybody.
Or in my case, I'm waving bye now that you can see it.
Yes.
Bye.